June 6, 1944. 2 miles inland from the Normandy coast, as a thick fog settled over the French countryside, Private First Class Marcus Johnson lay motionless atop a crumbling stone farmhouse. His breath came in shallow wisps against the cool night air as he surveyed the disastrous scene unfolding across the moonlit fields. Scattered across 20 square miles of unfamiliar terrain, hundreds of American paratroopers, who believed they would be landing in organized units, were now isolated, lost, and vulnerable to enemy patrols. Little did he know that his specialized training, skills the Army had been reluctant to utilize, would soon determine the fate of 200 men stranded behind enemy lines. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable account of how one overlooked soldier would transform a potentially catastrophic military blunder into one of the most impressive rescue operations of the European theater, demonstrating that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of heroism come from the most unexpected sources. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to Private Johnson's uniform as he adjusted his position atop the abandoned farmhouse. At 24 years of age, Marcus Johnson had already experienced a lifetime of challenges. Born in Harlem, New York, he had grown up under the shadow of the Great Depression, watching his father work double shifts at the rail yard to keep food on the table. Before the war, Johnson had worked as a telegraph operator for Western Union, developing an uncanny ability to translate the rapid dots and dashes of Morse code without even needing to write them down. When he enlisted after Pearl Harbor, his aptitude tests revealed exceptional marksmanship skills as well, but the segregated military of 1942 had limited opportunities for black soldiers regardless of their abilities. "They'll never let you be a sniper, Johnson," Staff Sergeant Miller had told him during basic training at Fort Benning. "They'll have you driving trucks or cooking meals before they put a specialized rifle in your hands." Johnson had simply nodded, keeping his thoughts to himself, as he always did. "Yes, Sergeant," he had replied, his deep voice betraying none of the frustration he felt. But Captain Robert Westfield of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment had different ideas. A former university professor from Philadelphia, Westfield had recognized Johnson's potential during a joint training exercise. "I don't care what color his skin is," Westfield had argued to his superior officers. "The man can hit a target at 800 yards with remarkable consistency, and he knows Morse code better than our communications officers. He belongs in a specialized role." After months of bureaucratic resistance, Johnson had been assigned to Westfield's unit as a scout sniper, though many of the other officers viewed the assignment as an experiment doomed to failure. Now, as part of the massive Allied invasion of Normandy, Johnson found himself separated from his unit after a jump gone terribly wrong, alone behind enemy lines. Colonel James Hendricks, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, paced nervously inside a damaged church steeple 3 miles southwest of Johnson's position. A seasoned veteran at 38 years old, Hendricks had fought in North Africa and Sicily, but nothing had prepared him for the chaos of this night's operation. The dispersal of his paratroopers had been catastrophic. High winds and enemy anti-aircraft fire had scattered his men across the Norman countryside like seeds thrown to the wind. According to his latest intelligence, only 30% of his battalion had reached the designated assembly points. "This is an absolute disaster, Major," Hendricks muttered to his executive officer, Major William Davis. "We're supposed to secure the causeway at Lafayette Bridge by 0800 hours. At this rate, we won't have enough men to take a French bakery, let alone hold off a counterattack." Davis, a stocky man with prematurely grey hair, studied the map spread before them. "Reports indicate at least 200 of our men landed in Sector 4, Colonel. That's nearly 5 miles from our position, and directly in the path of the 21st Panzer Division's likely approach. Those men are as good as lost unless we can establish communication and guide them here before daybreak," Hendricks said, his weathered face grave in the dim light of their tactical lamp. "And we've got German patrols crawling all over the countryside between us." Meanwhile, Oberst Colonel Werner Freiherr von Münchhausen of the 21st Panzer Division stood examining aerial reconnaissance photographs in his command post near Carentan. At 42, Munchausen was considered one of the more moderate officers in the German army of the time. A decorated veteran of the Great War, he had privately expressed doubts about the German leadership's military strategy, though he kept such dangerous opinions to himself. What concerned him now was the evidence of American paratroopers landing throughout his sector. "They are scattered, disorganized," observed his intelligence officer, Hauptmann Captain Kurt Dieter. "Our patrols report capturing several lost Americans wandering in the marshes. They seem to have no idea where they are or where their comrades might be." Munchausen studied the map carefully. "Do not underestimate them, Dieter. The Americans will attempt to consolidate their forces. I want additional patrols here, here, and here," he said, pointing to several crossroads on the map. "And have the 7th Company move to this ridge overlooking the fields south of Sainte-Mère-Église. If the paratroopers try to move across that open ground, we will be waiting for them." Back at his elevated position, Marcus Johnson systematically scanned the terrain through his binoculars. The moon occasionally broke through the cloud cover, illuminating the hedgerows and flooded fields below. His trained eye caught movement. A group of approximately 30 paratroopers, moving cautiously along a sunken farm road, their distinctive helmets visible in the moonlight. Sergeant Frank Roselli led this particular group of displaced soldiers from the 505th. A second-generation Italian-American from Boston. Roselli had taken charge of these men after finding them scattered throughout the drop zone. "Stay low and keep quiet," Roselli whispered to the men following him. "Lieutenant Davis's map is useless. We are nowhere near our designated landing zone." Private Eddie Kowalski, a 19-year-old replacement from Chicago who had joined the unit just 2 months earlier, moved alongside Roselli. "Sarge, we've been walking for hours. Are you sure we're heading toward our guys and not straight into a German welcome party?" "No, I'm not sure," Roselli admitted quietly, "but continuing west follows our original mission plan. With any luck, we'll encounter other American units moving toward the objectives." What neither Roselli nor the other scattered groups of paratroopers realized was that they were walking into exactly what Colonel Munchausen had anticipated: a carefully planned German ambush position along the ridge. Johnson, however, could see what they could not from his elevated position. Through his binoculars, he observed the glint of moonlight reflecting off German helmets positioned along the ridgeline. He counted at least 2 machine gun positions and approximately 20 soldiers lying in wait. If Roselli's group continued on their current path, they would walk directly into the killing zone. Johnson faced an impossible dilemma. He had no radio to warn the approaching Americans, and revealing his position would likely result in his capture or worse. But allowing his fellow soldiers to walk into an ambush was unthinkable. Then an idea formed. Reaching into his pack, Johnson retrieved his signaling mirror, standard equipment for paratroopers who might need to signal aircraft. The moon was bright enough that, properly angled, the mirror could flash visible signals across the darkened landscape. But would anyone in the approaching group recognize Morse code? With careful precision, Johnson began to flash a simple message: "Danger ahead. Stop ambush on ridge stop." For several agonizing minutes, there was no indication that anyone had noticed his signals. Then, to his immense relief, he saw Roselli halt his men with a raised hand. Someone in the group had spotted the flashes and understood the message. Sergeant Roselli stared at the distant flashes of light, coming from what appeared to be an old farmhouse. Having worked briefly as a telegraph messenger before the war, he recognized the distinctive pattern of Morse code. "Hold up," he whispered to his men. "Someone's signaling us." Private Danny Green, who had been a Boy Scout before the war, had also noticed the flashing light. "That's Morse code, Sarge. It's warning about an ambush ahead on the ridge." Roselli squinted toward the farmhouse. "Could be a trap," he muttered, weighing their options. "Don't think so, Sergeant," Green replied. "They're using our recognition codes at the beginning of the message. That's one of ours up there." After a moment of consideration, Roselli made his decision. "Change of plans. We're diverting south through that orchard. Pass the word back quietly." From his position, Johnson watched with relief as the group changed direction, skirting the ambush site by several hundred yards. But his satisfaction was short-lived. In the distance, he could see more groups of paratroopers moving across the landscape, all facing the same peril. Some appeared to be heading toward another German patrol, moving along the hedgerows to the north. Johnson realized that his elevated position gave him a unique advantage. He could see both the scattered American paratroopers and the German forces moving to intercept them. If he could somehow coordinate the movements of these lost units, there might be a chance to gather a substantial force and reach the battalion's objectives after all. Major Davis had established a makeshift command post in the damaged church and was attempting to make sense of the scattered reports coming in from runners and the few functioning radios. Colonel Hendricks, we've got confirmation that elements of Baker and Charlie companies landed near Highsville, but Easy and Dog are completely unaccounted for, Davis reported. What about our heavy equipment drops? Hendricks asked. Most missed the drop zones, sir. We've got reports of equipment canisters as far as 7 miles from our position. Hendricks slammed his fist against the makeshift table. Without those mortars and machine guns, holding the causeway will be nearly impossible if the German armor counterattacks at dawn. At that moment, a young lieutenant burst into the command post. Sir, one of our forward observers reports seeing Morse code signals coming from a farmhouse about 3 miles northeast of our position. They appear to be directing our scattered units away from German patrols. Morse code? Hendricks's eyebrows rose. Who would be using Morse in the field? Major Davis suddenly remembered. Sir, that could be Private Johnson. He was a telegraph operator before the war, and Captain Westfield mentioned he had integrated Morse signaling into their scout training. Johnson, the colored sniper? Hendricks asked, recalling the unusual personnel assignment that had raised eyebrows among his staff. Yes, sir. He was with Captain Westfield's stick during the jump. Hendricks considered this information. If Johnson has established an observation post with good visibility, he might be our best chance at coordinating our scattered forces. Do we have anyone who can reach his position? I can try, Colonel, volunteered Lieutenant Michael Parker, who had been serving as a liaison officer. I grew up hunting in terrain like this. I can move quietly. Take 2 men and see if you can locate that farmhouse, Hendricks ordered. If it is Johnson, tell him to continue signaling our men, but we need him to direct them to these coordinates. He pointed to a location on the map. That's where we're establishing our assembly point for the push toward the bridge. As Lieutenant Parker departed on his mission, Sergeant Roselli and his group had successfully avoided the German ambush position and found temporary shelter in a small apple orchard. As they caught their breath, Roselli noticed more flashes coming from the farmhouse. Our guardian angel is at it again, he remarked to Green. What's he saying now? Green watched intently. He's directing us to continue south for 500 yards, then west along a stream bed. Says there are more of our guys scattered throughout this area. How does he know that? Kowalski asked nervously. Must have a good vantage point up there, Roselli replied. And right now, he's the only one who seems to know what's happening in this mess. Following the mysterious signals, Roselli led his group as directed. Sure enough, after traveling along the stream bed for approximately 20 minutes, they encountered another group of 15 paratroopers from their regiment, led by a Lieutenant Rodriguez. Roselli, how in the world did you find us? Rodriguez asked in amazement. We're following signals from someone in a farmhouse to the northeast, Roselli explained. Morse code. Whoever it is seems to have eyes on the entire area and is helping guide our people around German positions. Rodriguez looked skeptical. That sounds like it could be a sophisticated trap. Maybe, but those signals have already helped us avoid one ambush. I'm inclined to trust them until proven otherwise. The combined group continued following the signals, and within the hour, they had joined with 2 more groups of lost paratroopers, bringing their number to nearly 70 men. Back at the farmhouse, Johnson continued his methodical surveillance and signaling. He had now identified at least 5 separate groups of American paratroopers, totaling well over 100 men. By carefully timing his signals and providing specific directions, he had successfully guided 3 of these groups into consolidating their forces while avoiding German patrols. The work was mentally exhausting, requiring Johnson to constantly monitor multiple moving elements across miles of unfamiliar terrain in the dark. His eyes burned from the strain of hours of intense observation, and his hands were growing numb in the cool night air. But each time he saw another group of paratroopers successfully connect with their comrades, he felt a surge of determination. "Just doing my job," he whispered to himself, repeating the mantra that had carried him through the countless indignities and obstacles he had faced in the segregated military. Near midnight, Johnson detected movement at the base of the farmhouse, soldiers approaching in a tactical formation that suggested American training. Reaching for his rifle, he maintained his vigilance until he could confirm their identities. "Flash!" came a whispered challenge from below, the first half of the night's recognition code. "Thunder," Johnson responded correctly, allowing himself to relax slightly. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, Lieutenant Parker and 2 enlisted men. They climbed carefully to Johnson's position on the roof. "Private Johnson?" Parker asked, clearly surprised to find a single soldier operating alone at this critical observation post. "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, not taking his eyes from his binoculars as he continued scanning the terrain. "Colonel Hendricks sent us to find you. We've been tracking your signal flashes. Impressive work, soldier." "Thank you, sir. I've identified 5 major groups of our paratroopers so far. I've managed to guide 3 of them to consolidate here." Johnson indicated a position on his crude hand-drawn map. "That's approximately 70 men now. 2 more groups here and here, perhaps 60 more men total. But they're currently pinned down by German patrols." Lieutenant Parker studied Johnson's map with amazement. The private had essentially created a comprehensive tactical overview of the entire area through nothing but personal observation. "This is incredible, Johnson. How did you manage all this?" Johnson finally turned from his binoculars, his expression matter of fact. "Had a good view, sir, and the Germans have been predictable in their patrol patterns." Parker shook his head in admiration. "Well, Colonel Hendricks wants your observation skills focused on a new objective. We're establishing an assembly point here." He indicated the location on Johnson's map. "We need to gather as many of our scattered forces there as possible before dawn. Can you redirect your signals to guide our men to this position?" "Yes, sir," Johnson replied without hesitation. "But there's a German company moving into positions along this road." He pointed to a line on his map. "Any of our people approaching from the north will walk right into them. We need to establish an alternate route." For the next hour, Johnson and Parker developed a plan to guide the scattered paratroopers along a series of coordinated movements that would avoid the known German positions and bring them to the new assembly point. Using his methodical Morse code signals, Johnson began directing the consolidated group led by Roselli and Rodriguez. Meanwhile, Colonel Münchhausen was growing concerned about the American paratroopers' movements. What had initially appeared to be disorganized wandering now showed signs of purposeful coordination. "The Americans are consolidating their forces," he observed to Captain Dieter as they reviewed the latest patrol reports. "These scattered units are somehow finding each other despite the confusion of the drop." "Perhaps they have established radio communication," Dieter suggested. "No," Münchhausen replied thoughtfully. "Our signal intelligence has not detected any significant increase in American radio traffic. They are communicating through some other means." He studied the map carefully. The movement patterns suggest they are being directed by someone with an elevated observation position. "Find me that observer, Dieter." As the German patrols intensified their search of high ground and potential observation posts, the risk to Johnson's position increased dramatically. Lieutenant Parker recognized the danger. "We need to relocate before the Germans identify this position," he told Johnson. "You've become too valuable to risk capture." Johnson nodded in agreement, but his expression remained troubled. "Sir, there are still those 2 groups to the north, about 60 men total. If we move now, they'll be left without guidance." Parker considered this dilemma. How long would it take to get them moving toward the assembly point? With clear signals, and if they follow directions precisely, perhaps 2 hours. But the German patrol patterns suggest we have less than 1 hour before they investigate this farmhouse. The lieutenant made a quick decision. "I'll take my men and create a diversion to the west. That should draw attention away from this position and might pull some of the German patrols away from the northern group's route. You continue signaling until the northern groups are safely on their way, then make your way to the assembly point." "That's very risky, sir," Johnson cautioned. "So is jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, Private," Parker replied with a grim smile. "But that's why they pay us the extra $50 a month." After Parker and his men departed to create their diversion, Johnson returned to his signaling with renewed urgency. The northern groups, he discovered, were led by Captain Westfield himself, along with elements of Dog Company. Through persistent signaling, Johnson established communication with the captain and began directing their movements towards safety. The first sign of Parker's diversion came 30 minutes later, a series of small explosions and scattered rifle fire approximately half a mile to the west. As Johnson had hoped, several German patrols immediately moved to investigate the disturbance, temporarily clearing the route for Westfield's men. Captain Westfield had recognized Johnson's distinctive signaling style immediately. "That's Johnson up there," he told his executive officer, Lieutenant Walsh. "I'd stake my life on it." "Looks like we already are staking our lives on it," Walsh replied dryly, "but his signals haven't led us astray yet." Following Johnson's meticulous directions, Westfield led his men along a circuitous route that skirted German positions. At one point, they passed within 100 yards of a German patrol, close enough to hear German voices. But Johnson's signals had timed their movement perfectly with the patrol's momentary distraction by Parker's diversion. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Johnson could see that Westfield's group was finally on a safe trajectory toward the assembly point. The diversion created by Lieutenant Parker appeared to have drawn significant German attention, as patrols that had been systematically searching high ground were now concentrated to the west. With his mission accomplished, Johnson prepared to abandon his observation post. He carefully packed his equipment, ensuring he left no trace of his presence. Just as he was preparing to descend from the roof, he caught sight of movement on the road approximately 200 yards from the farmhouse, a German patrol of 8 men moving directly toward his position. Johnson froze, calculating his options. The patrol would reach the farmhouse in less than 5 minutes. If he tried to flee now, he would likely be spotted in the open terrain. His best chance was to remain hidden and hope they would conduct only a cursory search of the seemingly abandoned building. Silently, Johnson moved to a concealed position within the farmhouse's attic, beneath the eaves where the roof had partially collapsed. From here he could observe the approaching patrol while remaining hidden in the shadows. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands remained steady on his rifle. Years of hunting squirrels in the woods near his grandfather's home in Virginia had taught him the value of absolute stillness. The German patrol surrounded the farmhouse, 2 soldiers covering each approach, while the others prepared to enter. Johnson could hear them speaking quietly as they coordinated their movements. They clearly suspected the building might contain American paratroopers. As the Germans methodically searched the ground floor, Johnson remained motionless in his hiding place. The sound of boots on the wooden stairs told him they were ascending to his level. He controlled his breathing, taking shallow breaths as his father had taught him during hunting trips. 2 German soldiers entered the attic space, their flashlights sweeping across the dusty floor and abandoned furniture. One beam passed within inches of Johnson's position, but did not discover him in the deep shadows beneath the collapsed section of roof. After several tense minutes, apparently satisfied that the building was empty, the Germans departed. Johnson waited a full 30 minutes after the patrol had moved on, before emerging from his hiding place. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, dawn was approaching, and with it, the need for all American forces to be in position for the coming battle. Moving with the careful precision that had kept him alive through this long night, Johnson made his way toward the assembly point where, thanks to his efforts, nearly 200 American paratroopers had managed to regroup from the scattered disaster of the initial drop. At the assembly point, Colonel Hendricks was astonished by the number of troops who had successfully navigated the challenging terrain and German patrols to reach the position. As reports came in from the various unit leaders, a clear picture emerged of how this minor miracle had occurred. "Sir," Major Davis reported, "Sergeant Roselli's group reports they were guided here by Morse code signals from a farmhouse to the northeast. Captain Westfield's men say the same thing. Based on Lieutenant Parker's last communication, we believe that was Private Johnson's work." "One man?" Hendricks asked incredulously. "One man coordinated all this?" "Yes, sir," Davis confirmed. "Through the night, Johnson apparently observed both our scattered units and German patrol patterns, then used Morse code signals to guide our men around enemy positions and toward consolidation points." Captain Westfield, who had arrived with the latest group, added, "That's consistent with Johnson's capabilities, Colonel. His background as a telegraph operator combined with his observational skills made this possible. I've never seen anyone who can process that much visual information and communicate it so effectively. Colonel Hendricks shook his head in amazement. And where is Private Johnson now? As dawn broke over the Normandy countryside, the assembly point bustled with activity. Colonel Hendricks surveyed the gathered forces with a mixture of relief and concern. Thanks to Johnson's night-long efforts, they had salvaged what could have been a disastrous situation, but Private Johnson himself had still not arrived. "Any sign of him?" Hendricks asked Major Davis, who had just returned from checking with the perimeter guards. "No, sir," Davis replied. "Lieutenant Parker and his men haven't returned either." Captain Westfield approached, his uniform muddied from the night's journey. "Colonel, request permission to take a small team to search for Johnson. He risked everything to get us here. We can't leave him out there." Hendricks checked his watch. "The bridge assault cannot wait, Captain. We move out in 20 minutes. "Sir, with all due respect, I understand your concern, Captain," Hendricks interrupted. "But we have our objectives. The success of this operation impacts the entire invasion force." After a brief pause, he added, "Take 4 men. You have 1 hour to find him and return, not a minute more." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," Westfield replied, immediately turning to select his search team. Sergeant Roselli volunteered immediately. "I want to meet the man who saved our hides, Captain." Private Green and 2 other experienced pathfinders rounded out the small search party. They departed quickly, moving at a rapid pace toward the farmhouse where Johnson had established his observation post. Meanwhile, Johnson himself was navigating through a dense thicket of hedgerows, carefully avoiding German patrols that had increased with the coming dawn. He had taken a circuitous route to avoid detection, adding considerable distance to his journey. His muscles ached from the tension of maintaining his observation position all night, and fatigue clouded his thinking after hours of intense concentration. Pausing to check his compass, Johnson heard voices ahead, German soldiers establishing a roadblock at a small crossroads he needed to pass through. There was no way around it without backtracking nearly a mile, which would delay him significantly. As he considered his options, he became aware of movement behind him. Turning slowly, rifle ready, Johnson found himself face to face with Lieutenant Parker. "Easy, Private," Parker whispered, lowering his own weapon. "Glad to see you made it out." Relief washed over Johnson. "Lieutenant, I thought you might have been compromised during your diversion." "Nearly was," Parker admitted. "Lost both my men. Stevenson was taken when we got separated, and Miller's leg was injured. I had to leave him hidden in a barn about half a mile back." The lieutenant's face showed the strain of the difficult decision. "We need to get to the assembly point. Colonel Hendricks will be moving the force toward the bridge soon." "There's a German roadblock ahead," Johnson informed him. "At least 8 men with what appeared to be a vehicle-mounted machine gun." Parker frowned. "Is there another way around?" "Yes, sir. But it would add at least an hour to our journey. By then, the battalion will have moved out." The lieutenant considered their options. "We need to get back to provide the intelligence you've gathered about German positions. It could be crucial for the assault." Johnson nodded in agreement, then gestured toward a small rise about 200 yards to their right. "There's a drainage culvert that runs under the road near that rise. I noticed it earlier during my observations. It might be large enough for us to pass through without being detected." "Good thinking, Johnson. Let's move." The 2 soldiers made their way carefully to the drainage culvert, which proved to be narrow but passable. Crawling through the damp, confined space, they emerged on the other side of the roadblock, successfully bypassing the German position. As they continued toward the assembly point, Johnson shared his detailed observations of German positions with the lieutenant, who was increasingly impressed by the private's remarkable situational awareness. "How did you keep track of all these moving elements throughout the night, Johnson?" Parker asked as they paused to get their bearings. Johnson considered the question. "My grandfather was a hunter, sir. Taught me to see the whole landscape, not just what I was aiming at. Said a good hunter always knows where every animal in the forest is moving, not just his target." After a moment, he added, "And the telegraph work helped with organizing the information in my head, sorting signals from noise." "Well, those skills just saved nearly 200 American lives," Parker said. "Colonel Hendricks will want a full report." Johnson's expression remained neutral, but there was a hint of skepticism in his eyes. Yes, sir. Meanwhile, Captain Westfield's search party had reached the farmhouse where Johnson had maintained his observation post. Finding it empty, they spread out to search for signs of his departure route. "Captain," Sergeant Roselli called out, kneeling beside some disturbed earth near the back of the farmhouse. "Boot prints. American issue, and based on the depth and spacing, I'd say he was moving at a quick pace, heading southeast." Green, who had been scouting the perimeter, added, "German patrol came through here too, sir. Looks like they searched the building." Westfield made a quick decision. "He's heading for the assembly point, but taking an indirect route to avoid German contact. We need to move southeast and try to intercept his likely path." The search party moved out, following the faint trail left by Johnson. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, they encountered a German patrol moving in the opposite direction. Both groups spotted each other simultaneously. "Down!" Westfield ordered, as the Germans raised their rifles. The Americans took cover behind a hedgerow, as the German patrol, approximately 6 men strong, did the same across a small field. Neither side had a clear advantage, and the resulting standoff threatened to delay the search party beyond their 1-hour limit. Sergeant Roselli whispered to Westfield, "Sir, we're burning daylight. Johnson is heading to the assembly point. If we get bogged down here—" "I know," Westfield interrupted, assessing their options. "Green, can you work your way around to the right? There's a drainage ditch that might provide cover." Before Green could respond, the distinct sound of German voices shouting orders came from behind the enemy position. The German patrol suddenly began withdrawing, apparently responding to new orders. "What's happening?" Green wondered aloud. "I don't know, but I'm not questioning our good fortune," Westfield replied. "Let's move before they change their minds." The search party continued southeast, moving more rapidly now that the immediate threat had passed. As they approached a small stream, Roselli held up his hand, signaling the others to stop. "Someone's coming," he whispered. The Americans took defensive positions, weapons at the ready. A moment later, 2 figures emerged from the brush about 50 yards downstream, Lieutenant Parker and Private Johnson. "Captain Westfield," Parker called out, recognizing his commanding officer. Westfield lowered his weapon, relief evident on his face. "Lieutenant Johnson, we've been searching for you." The 2 groups converged, and Westfield briefly explained their mission to find Johnson. Parker recounted their journey, including the German roadblock they had avoided. "We need to move quickly," Westfield urged. "Colonel Hendricks gave us 1 hour, and we're already pushing that limit." Together, the expanded group made their way toward the assembly point, moving as rapidly as stealth would allow. Johnson led them along a route that avoided known German positions, demonstrating once again his exceptional memory and situational awareness. They arrived at the assembly point, only to discover that the main force had already departed for the bridge assault. A small rearguard remained, preparing to follow once the area was secured. Lieutenant Sanders, who commanded the rear element, briefed them quickly. "Colonel Hendricks moved out 20 minutes ago. They're proceeding with the assault on Lafayette Bridge. German resistance has been reported along their route." "Did they know which German units are in position?" Johnson asked, concern evident in his voice. "They had some intelligence, but nothing comprehensive," Sanders replied. Johnson turned to Captain Westfield. "Sir, during my observation, I identified a German heavy weapons company positioned along the main approach to the bridge. If the colonel is taking the direct route, then our men are heading into a serious engagement without complete intelligence." Westfield finished the thought. "Lieutenant Sanders, we need to catch up with the main force immediately." Sanders pointed to a radio operator nearby. "Henderson there has been maintaining periodic contact with the advance element. The last report indicated they were meeting light resistance, but that was 10 minutes ago." Westfield hurried to the radio operator. "Get me in contact with Colonel Hendricks." After a brief exchange with the main force's communications team, Westfield was informed that the colonel was already engaged with the enemy and unavailable. The captain made a quick decision. "Johnson, Parker, Roselli, you're with me. We're going to catch up with the main force and provide the colonel with Johnson's intelligence. The rest of you remain with Lieutenant Sanders." The 4 men moved out immediately, following the trail left by the main force. Johnson set a brisk pace, his fatigue seemingly forgotten in the urgency of their mission. After 15 minutes of rapid movement, they began to hear the sounds of combat ahead. Colonel Hendricks and the assembled paratroopers had indeed encountered the German heavy weapons company that Johnson had observed. The Americans had deployed along a hedgerow facing a well-defended German position that commanded the approach to La Fière Bridge. The initial assault had stalled under accurate fire from multiple machine gun positions. "We're taking too many casualties trying to advance across that open ground," Major Davis reported to Hendricks, who was studying the German positions through his binoculars. "We need to flank their position, but that left side is well covered," Hendricks replied, frustration evident in his voice. "Sir," a runner approached, breathing heavily. "Captain Westfield has arrived with Lieutenant Parker and Private Johnson. They have information about the enemy positions." Hendricks turned as the newly arrived group made their way to his command position behind a stone wall. "Captain, I hope you have something useful for me. We're pinned down here." "Private Johnson has detailed intelligence on the German positions, sir," Westfield replied. He observed them throughout the night from his farmhouse vantage point. Johnson stepped forward, kneeling beside the colonel. "Sir, the German company has 3 machine gun positions here, here, and here." He indicated points on the map spread before them. "But there's a blind spot in their coverage due to that small rise to our right. The terrain blocks their line of sight to this drainage ditch, which runs to within 75 yards of their right flank." Hendricks studied the map. "You're certain about this blind spot, Private?" "Yes, sir, I watched them establish their positions before dawn. They have limited personnel on that flank because they believe the terrain makes it impassable." The colonel made a quick decision. "Major Davis, organize an assault element to exploit this approach. Captain Westfield, I want your best men ready to provide covering fire when they make their move." Johnson spoke up again. "Sir, there's one more thing. I observed a supply truck delivering ammunition to their position about an hour before dawn. It's parked behind that farmhouse to their rear. If we could somehow disable it, the explosion would create a significant distraction," Hendricks finished, a plan forming in his mind. "But how do we reach it? It's well behind their lines." Lieutenant Parker joined the conversation. "Sir, while evading German patrols, we discovered a drainage culvert that runs under the road. There might be similar drainage infrastructure near the bridge that could provide concealed access." Johnson nodded in agreement. "The topography suggests a natural water runoff toward that small stream to the north. Standard French agricultural practice would include drainage channels to prevent flooding." Hendricks looked at the 2 men with newfound respect. "You're suggesting we could infiltrate behind their lines through drainage culverts?" "It would be a tight fit, sir," Parker admitted, "but possible for a small team." The colonel considered the proposal for only a moment. "Make it happen, Lieutenant. Take Johnson and 2 volunteers. If you can create that distraction, it could make the difference in this assault." Within minutes, Parker had assembled his small team. Johnson would accompany him along with Sergeant Roselli and Private Green, both of whom volunteered immediately. "The drainage system likely connects near that hedgerow," Johnson explained, pointing to a position approximately 100 yards to their left. "We can enter there and follow it behind the German lines." As the infiltration team prepared to depart, Colonel Hendricks approached Johnson. "Private, your observational skills have already saved hundreds of lives tonight. This mission is beyond what I would normally ask of any man, but especially—" He stopped himself, reconsidering his words. "Especially a colored soldier, sir." Johnson finished for him, his expression neutral. Hendricks had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I was going to say, especially one who has already done so much. Your actions tonight have been extraordinary, Johnson." "Just doing my job, sir," Johnson replied with the same phrase he had whispered to himself throughout the night. The infiltration team moved out, making their way carefully to the drainage entry point Johnson had identified. As he had predicted, they found a large drainage culvert partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. One by one, they entered the narrow passage. The culvert was barely large enough for a man to crawl through, and the team moved forward slowly in the dim light. Water seeped through from above, making the passage muddy and uncomfortable. After what seemed an eternity of claustrophobic crawling, they reached a junction where the culvert branched in 2 directions. "Which way?" Parker whispered to Johnson. who was leading. Johnson paused, mentally reconstructing the terrain above them based on his observations. Right fork should lead toward the farmhouse and the ammunition truck. They continued along the right passage for another 50 yards before Johnson halted again. Pressing his ear to the top of the culvert, he listened carefully. "German voices above us," he whispered. "We must be near their position." The passage began to slope upward, eventually ending at a concrete drainage outlet partially obscured by bushes. Through the foliage, they could see the farmhouse approximately 30 yards away. The German supply truck was parked behind it, just as Johnson had observed. Parker assessed the situation quickly. 2 guards near the truck. "We need a distraction to get close enough." Roselli pointed to a small outbuilding about 20 yards to their right. "If we could create a noise over there, it might draw their attention long enough for someone to reach the truck." "I'll handle the distraction," Green volunteered. "I was a mechanic before the war. If I can reach the truck, I can make sure it creates a proper diversion." Parker nodded. "Johnson, you and Roselli create the distraction. Green and I will make for the truck. Once the diversion is in place, we all withdraw through the culvert immediately. No heroics, understood?" The team acknowledged the plan. Green handed Roselli his helmet filled with small stones they had collected in the culvert. When thrown against the outbuilding's metal roof, they would create substantial noise. Johnson and Roselli positioned themselves at the drainage outlet, waiting for Parker's signal. When it came, Roselli hurled the stones onto the outbuilding roof, creating a clattering that immediately drew the attention of the German guards. As the guards moved to investigate, Parker and Green sprinted to the truck, staying low and using the farmhouse as cover. Green quickly examined the vehicle, locating the fuel tank. Using his knife, he punctured the fuel line, allowing gasoline to pool beneath the truck. He then prepared a time-delay ignition using matches and a slow-burning fuse fashioned from a piece of rope. 30 seconds, Green whispered to Parker as they retreated toward the drainage culvert. The team reassembled at the culvert entrance and quickly disappeared inside just as the German guards were returning to their post. They had crawled approximately 20 yards when a muffled explosion rocked the ground above them, followed by shouts of alarm in German. "That ought to create the distraction the colonel needed," Parker remarked as they continued their withdrawal. Back at the American position, Colonel Hendricks heard the explosion and immediately ordered the flanking maneuver to begin. A platoon of 30 men moved rapidly along the drainage ditch Johnson had identified, approaching the German right flank, while their attention was diverted by the burning supply truck. The maneuver caught the German defenders completely by surprise. Within minutes, the Americans had overcome the right flank position and were attacking the German center from both front and side. The coordinated assault forced the German company to withdraw, abandoning their defensive positions. By mid-morning, the Americans had secured La Fière Bridge, a critical objective that would allow Allied forces to move inland from the beaches. Colonel Hendricks established a command post near the bridge and was receiving reports when Parker's infiltration team returned. "Mission accomplished, sir," Parker reported. "The German ammunition truck provided the distraction as planned." "Well done, Lieutenant," Hendricks replied. "Your team's actions were instrumental in securing this objective." Turning to Johnson, he added, "Private, I'd like a complete briefing on all German positions you observed last night. That information could be vital for our next phase of operations." For the next hour, Johnson worked with the battalion intelligence officer, meticulously recreating his mental map of German positions, patrol patterns, and force distributions. His extraordinary memory and attention to detail provided the Americans with invaluable intelligence that would shape their operations in the coming days. As the debriefing concluded, Captain Westfield approached Johnson. "The Colonel has requested that you remain attached to battalion headquarters as a special reconnaissance advisor. Your observational skills are too valuable to risk in standard infantry operations." Johnson accepted the assignment with the same quiet professionalism he had demonstrated throughout. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Later that afternoon, as American forces consolidated their positions around the bridge, Colonel Hendricks called a meeting of his company commanders and staff officers. Johnson was surprised to receive an invitation through Captain "The Colonel specifically requested your presence, Johnson," Westfield explained. I think he wants you to brief everyone directly on the German dispositions." When Johnson entered the command post, a damaged but functional stone farmhouse near the bridge, the room fell silent. Colonel Hendricks stood at the head of a table where maps were spread out. "Gentlemen," Hendricks began, "before we discuss our next objectives, I want to recognize an extraordinary achievement. Last night, when our airborne drops scattered our forces across miles of enemy territory, we faced a potential disaster. One soldier, acting on his own initiative, established an observation post and used his exceptional skills to coordinate the movements of our scattered units." The colonel turned to Johnson. Private First Class Marcus Johnson, through his actions, directly contributed to the successful assembly of nearly 200 paratroopers who would otherwise have been isolated and vulnerable to enemy action. Furthermore, his detailed intelligence on enemy positions was instrumental in our successful assault on this critical bridge objective. The officers around the table looked at Johnson with new respect. Major Davis spoke up. "How did you manage to coordinate so many scattered units, Private?" "Morse code signals, sir," Johnson replied. "I used a signaling mirror to flash directions to our units, guiding them around German patrols and toward consolidation points." "In the dark?" one of the company commanders asked incredulously. "Yes, sir. The moon provided enough light for the signals to be visible at a distance. Several of our men recognized the code and relayed the messages to their units." Captain Westfield added, "Johnson was a telegraph operator before the war. His ability to process and communicate complex information through Morse code is exceptional." Colonel Hendricks cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, Private Johnson's actions exemplify the initiative and resourcefulness that will be required for our success in this campaign. I've submitted a recommendation for appropriate recognition of his service." Turning to Johnson, he added, "Thank you. Private, your contribution will not be forgotten." Johnson nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir." The meeting continued, focusing on the battalion's next objectives. Johnson remained quietly in the background, providing input when asked about specific terrain features or observed German positions. His detailed knowledge repeatedly proved valuable as the officers planned their operations. As the meeting concluded, Sergeant Roselli approached Johnson. "The men have been talking, Johnson. Word of what you did last night has spread through the companies. They're calling you the Lighthouse now." Johnson raised an eyebrow. "The Lighthouse?" "Because your signals guided us home through the darkness," Roselli explained with a grin. "It's a good name. It'll stick." Later that evening, as Johnson took a moment of rest behind the American lines, Lieutenant Parker found him sitting alone, cleaning his rifle. "There you are," Parker said, sitting beside him on a fallen log. "The Colonel's aide has been looking for you. Apparently there's a correspondent from Stars and Stripes who wants to interview you about last night." Johnson continued methodically cleaning his weapon. "Not much to tell, sir. Just did what needed doing." Parker studied him for a moment. "You know, most men would be eager for that kind of recognition." Johnson finally paused his work, looking up at the lieutenant. "Sir, with all due respect, I've seen how these stories get told. A colored soldier gets his name in the paper, then goes back to his segregated unit. Nothing really changes." "Maybe this time it's different," Parker suggested. "Maybe," Johnson conceded, though his tone conveyed skepticism. "But I didn't do it for recognition, sir. Those were our men out there, lost and vulnerable. Anyone with my vantage point would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that," Parker replied. "What you did required exceptional skills and courage that deserves acknowledgement regardless of anything else." Johnson considered this for a moment before responding. "My father used to say that a man's true character is revealed by what he does when no one is watching. For most of last night, I thought no one would ever know what I was doing up on that farmhouse roof. I was at peace with that." "Well, people do know now," Parker said, "and they're grateful." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Westfield. "Johnson, the Colonel wants you for a special reconnaissance mission. German reinforcements are reportedly moving toward our position from the south. We need to confirm their strength and composition." Johnson immediately stood, slinging his rifle. "Yes, sir." As he prepared to depart with Captain Westfield, Johnson turned back to Lieutenant Parker. About that interview, sir. Perhaps after this mission. Some things are more important right now. Parker smiled. I'll let them know. Good luck, Lighthouse. Johnson paused, hearing the nickname for the first time from an officer. A slight smile crossed his face before he nodded and followed Captain Westfield toward their next objective. In the days that followed, Johnson's reputation continued to grow among the paratroopers of the 505th Regiment. The story of how one skilled observer had coordinated the movements of scattered units through Morse code signals became part of the regiment's lore. More importantly, Johnson's continued service as a reconnaissance specialist provided valuable intelligence that saved countless American lives during the critical Normandy campaign. 2 months after D-Day, as the Allied forces pushed inland through France, Colonel Hendricks received notification that Johnson's recommendation for the Silver Star had been approved. The citation specifically mentioned his extraordinary initiative and skill in coordinating the movements of scattered airborne units through signal communications, directly contributing to the successful assembly of 200 paratroopers and the achievement of critical objectives. The award ceremony was held in a small French village recently liberated by American forces. Johnson stood at attention as Colonel Hendricks pinned the Silver Star to his uniform. Private First Class Johnson, Hendricks said formally, your actions on the night of June 6th demonstrated the highest traditions of military service. Your exceptional skills as an observer and communicator, combined with your unwavering dedication to your fellow soldiers, directly contributed to the success of our mission and saved many American lives. After the ceremony, several reporters sought interviews with Johnson. Initially reluctant, he eventually agreed after encouragement from Captain Westfield. People back home need to hear this story, Westfield told him. Not just for you, but for all the others who might never get recognition. Johnson's story was published in Stars and Stripes, under the headline The Lighthouse, How One Soldier's Signals Guided Lost Paratroopers to Safety. The article detailed how Johnson, using only a signaling mirror and his exceptional knowledge of Morse code, had coordinated the movements of scattered airborne units throughout the night of the invasion. More significantly, the article made specific mention of Johnson's background and the challenges he had faced in a segregated military. It quoted Captain Westfield's assessment that Johnson's extraordinary skills would have gone unutilized if not for the intervention of officers who recognized his potential despite institutional barriers. The story was picked up by several newspapers back in the United States, including the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, prominent black newspapers that regularly highlighted the achievements of black servicemen. Johnson received hundreds of letters from readers inspired by his story. After the war, Johnson returned to New York and used his GI Bill benefits to earn a degree in electrical engineering from City College. He went on to work for a telecommunications company, where his combined knowledge of Morse code and electrical systems proved invaluable during the expansion of America's communications infrastructure in the 1950s. In 1964, when a documentary filmmaker sought to interview veterans of the Normandy campaign, Johnson was featured prominently. By then a respected engineer and community leader, he spoke candidly about his experiences during the war and the challenges faced by black servicemen. The night I spent on that farmhouse roof, signaling to lost paratroopers, was just one small part of a massive operation, Johnson told the interviewer. But it taught me something important. When people's lives are at stake, abilities matter more than anything else. In those moments, what you can do becomes more important than who you are or what you look like. Johnson's story became part of a broader narrative about the contributions of black Americans to the Allied victory in World War II, contributions that had often been overlooked in the immediate post-war period. His example inspired many young people, particularly in the black community, to pursue careers in technology and communications. The signaling techniques Johnson employed that night would eventually be rendered obsolete by advances in radio technology and electronic communications. But the principles he demonstrated, initiative, resourcefulness, and dedication to fellow soldiers regardless of background, remained timeless aspects of military service. In 2001, when the Veterans History Project began collecting first-hand accounts of American wartime experiences, Johnson's story was among the first to be recorded. Though in his 80s by then, his memory of that night in Normandy remained remarkably clear. He recalled the positions of German patrols, the movements of American units, and even the specific Morse code signals he had transmitted. "I never saw myself as a hero," Johnson said in that final interview. "I was just a soldier with a particular set of skills who found himself in a position to make a difference. The real heroes were the men who followed those signals, trusting them to lead towards safety rather than into danger. They took the real risk, moving through enemy territory based on nothing more than flashing lights from an unknown source." Johnson passed away in 2003, but his legacy lived on in military communications training, where his story was often cited as an example of improvisation and initiative in the field. At the Signal Corps Museum at Fort Gordon, a small exhibit commemorated the Lighthouse of Normandy, featuring Johnson's signaling mirror and a map of the paratroopers' movements that night. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from Sergeant Roselli, who had been among the first to follow Johnson's signals to safety. In a letter to Johnson's family after his passing, Roselli wrote, "In the darkness and confusion of that night, when everything had gone wrong and we were lost behind enemy lines, those flashing signals were like a lighthouse guiding ships through treacherous waters. Marcus Johnson didn't just save our lives. He reminded us that in our most desperate moments, help can come from the most unexpected sources. All we need is the wisdom to recognize it and the courage to follow where it leads." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.